Welcome back, everyone. We are ready to continue SECCA 2021 General Sessions. Very excited for this next presenter, a close personal friend of mine. You may notice this is an adjustment to the original agenda. Due to illness, Anna Toro from the CDC was not able to join us. However, this replacement speaker is going to be just as good, if not better, than what you were already expecting. Dr. Aaron Brown from North Central University in Colorado Springs is going to be here to discuss integrating Gen Z into our workspace. Now, Dr. Brown and I go back quite a few years to when he was a student life staff member at his alma mater, Oral Roberts University, where we were both employees. If any of you enjoyed this year's NCAA tournament, particularly the Golden Eagles' Cinderella run through the Sweet 16, you should know that it was Dr. Brown's cheering that really propelled them to that success. Since I met Aaron, he has achieved a master's degree and now a doctorate. He has gone on to become a rising academic in the field of Gen Z communications. And we are very privileged to have him join us this morning. This is a guy who has enough dirt on me to write a sitcom. So along with his academic acumen, this is a great personality and someone I know you're going to enjoy hearing from. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. J. Aaron Brown.
Well, good morning, everyone. Jimmy, that was worth the $20 bill I slipped you before we got started. So a little bit about me. I live in beautiful Colorado Springs, Colorado. I get to teach. I'm beyond thrilled and privileged to teach for North Central University as an assistant professor of business and finance, and get to work with some incredible students on their dissertations and how they're going to change the world through what they're working with. I am just geeked out to be here with everyone here at SECCA. And, you know, I'm drinking my coffee from a mug that says humble with a hint of Kanye. That's how I'm feeling talking to the SEC right now. So let's just dive in. You're not here to know about me and my favorite food that I just bought a Traeger a couple of weeks ago. You're not here for that. You're here because you want to know about Gen Z. And so with our first slide, I am a huge Guy Kawasaki fan of how to put a PowerPoint together, so minimalist as possible. So today we're going to talk about positives. Okay, what are the positives of Gen Z? What are some of the challenges, specifically the mental health crisis that Gen Z experiences? We're going to talk about how Gen Z formed into this generation of positives and challenges. We're going to talk about some philosophical traits of servant leadership that I think we can incorporate as leaders in our workspaces, or maybe we won't get to that today. I've always been told, leave your audience wanting a little more. We might not do that. You might have to bring me to your campus all by yourself. How these attributes contribute to cognitive behavioral therapy. I worked with Dr. Philip Nelson to develop some of these scenarios, or scenarios as I like to call them. And Jimmy Hart and I will walk through one or two of them at the end. We're going to talk about some CBT, and can't wait to catch you in the Q&A here in just a little bit. So one of my pet peeves that absolutely drives me crazy, let me give you two pet peeves that are absolutely driving me crazy. And one is those darn millennials. Okay, we need to have like a real conversation around this. The millennial generation does end. Millennials aren't just an attitude, it ends. And it ends at currently the age of 26. So if you were between the ages of 26 to about 38, 39, you're a millennial. Now I realize when I said 38, 39, somebody out there died inside. They did not want to be called a millennial. I'm 37. I wear the badge proudly. It makes great for jokes. I also like to say, well, I'm a millennial, and somehow that's a cop out, and I just get away with things. So it works for me. You should embrace it too. So that's where millennials end. Gen Z is currently between the ages of 7 and 25. So when people say Gen Z will enter the workforce soon, no, they've already entered the workforce. They're already there because they're between the ages of 7 and 25. They're 18 to 25. You got about 7 years of Gen Z already in your workplace, and maybe you've missed that. And it's important to know that there are distinctions between a millennial generation and a Gen Z, or a Gen X and a Gen Z. And we'll get into that just as we work our way through this talk. So the next question is, who is Gen Z? Who is Gen Z? I sound like an owl when I say that. Who is Gen Z? And so important thing to know is that they are born between the years 1996 to 2014. 1996 to 2014. Now, you've probably read some things where it has Gen Z beginning in 1999 and going to 2017. I don't think this is accurate. And again, I place them between the ages of 25 and between the ages of 7 to 25. But let me show you why I don't think it is accurate. So some people may say 9/11. 9/11 was a shaping force or power in the identity of Gen Z. No, there's no way, because if you're right and they're born like 97, 99, they're too young to really grasp what 9/11 was. You can talk to any Gen Zer on the street and ask about 9/11, and they have almost zero recollection of that time. So 9/11 is not a shaping force in their identity. Now, what is a shaping force? Two things: the smartphone and the 2008 financial crisis. Now, the smartphone debuted in 2007 with, or we think of it as debuting with, the Apple iPhone. And the Apple iPhone changed the way that we interact with our phones. I grew up in rural America. I grew up in a town of 800 people with a rotary dial, which means I was doing this, waiting for it to click all the way back, finger back in, moving the dial around, even party lines, things like that. And so, but with Gen Z, if I'm right, and I think that I am, and there's a lot of experts out there that would agree with this, if I'm right, that means Gen Z is about age 11 or 12 when the iPhone debuts. And what were parents already doing with cell phones? Maybe you were like me, you had the little Nokia brick, indestructible, drop it off of, 10-story building and run over it with the car. You're still playing that little snake game on it. It's working great. Parents were already giving their children cell phones in order to keep up with them. They just weren't smartphones as we know them today. So what does a smartphone do? Or what did it eventually do? Well, it gave us access to social media. So we see eventually apps like Facebook, Twitter, as they debuted, they became apps on these smartphones. And so used to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I really had to tee up how bad social media is for people. Since Netflix came out with that documentary, The Social Dilemma, I don't have to do that anymore. You know it's bad for you. I know it's bad for me. We're still all addicted in some way. I did take a 5-month hiatus at the beginning of the year, and it was like the best thing for me. It was amazing. You should do it too. But we do know that social media sends chemicals like cortisol and dopamine unnaturally through our brains and bodies. And that has a profound effect on heightening our levels, our wellness in the mental health arena. So we have smartphones that are affecting Gen Z's mental health and our mental health, to be honest with you. The difference is, I'm not an internet native. Like, I grew up in a time when there wasn't the internet. And then suddenly there was the internet, and we're all trying to figure out how to play game pool with each other on the internet. Gen Z is saturated in it. And that has made a ton of difference for them. The next thing is the 2008 financial crisis. Again, Gen Z are becoming teenagers as this is happening, and they're watching their Gen X parents struggle financially. And Gen X is a generation that has always kind of just got it socked to them financially. Like they grow up during the oil crisis, Black Monday in 1987, several other financial crises. I see Jimmy Hart smiling like, yeah, I have had it, have been punched in the kidneys a couple of times. So they're growing up watching their Gen X parents continue to struggle. And this has a profound effect on how they look at the world and their own personal finances. So on the next slide, I would say some really great qualities I see in Gen Z is that they are creative. They are a creative generation. They are great content developers, and they're developing content through what they know. And that's usually applications, social media applications. So TikTok, I don't even play around with TikTok, but it is a world of content development. Instagram influencing, the same thing. YouTube. This is a generation that has been able to really harness the idea of content. Practical, maybe we would say pragmatic. They are a practical, pragmatic generation. And we see this through studies that are coming out about which careers they're choosing. They're seeking stable careers. Where millennials like myself are like, let's do art. Gen Z is saying, I want to be an accountant. I want to be a nurse. I want to go into the military. Why? Well, because those are stable careers, and they saw their Gen X parents go through a very unstable time with the financial crisis. I would also say Gen Z is goal-oriented. They tend to know what they want and how to go for it. And then ethnically diverse. And I think this is one of the biggest wins. I think this is one of the biggest wins of the Gen Z generation, is that 1 out of 2 Gen Z are not Caucasian. And they're not just African American or Hispanic or Asian. Sometimes it's a mixture of different ethnicities that they represent bodily. And so I think that as we move forward in our American experience, that we will hopefully see many of the tensions that we experience today come down just a little bit, and we'll love each other just a little bit more and find more common ground because this generation is so ethnically diverse. So with the mental health crisis, we want to ask the question, how did we get here? And on the next slide, I've got some data from Pew Research. And so 70% of Gen Z report anxiety is a major problem. So their perception is that anxiety in their generation is a major problem. 26% report anxiety is a minor problem. Either way, almost 100% of Gen Z say that anxiety is a problem to some degree. And 20% of teenage girls report a major depressive episode. And that's an increase of 59%, almost 60% from 2007 to 2019. When it comes to bullying, it's actually teenage girls that experience the bulk of bullying. It's from them bullying each other, especially through social media applications. And according to the CDC, if you're age 18 or older, 11.2% of all adults report some type of anxiety episode, and 4.5% of all adults report experiencing some type of depression. So compare those adults to Gen Z and the perceptions, and you can see that we've got some challenges that we are wrestling with. So on the next slide, this is where I really geek out. Is how do generations work? And with this slide, we can see the 5 cycles of generations that we've experienced in America. So just know that there have been 5 cycles. Each cycle lasts for a period of 80 years. And in each cycle, there are 4 seasons. And those 4 seasons last for about 20 years apiece. And we experience them almost like the seasons that we experience in nature. So spring, summer, fall, winter, it's very much the same way. And the last 2 that we would look at is the Great Power Cycle, which lasted from 1860 to 1942, and the Millennial Cycle from 1943 to about 2023. The Great Power Cycle began after the Civil War, so that should say 1864, 1865 on that slide. I'm going to have to talk to my slide developer, which is me. And that lasted until about the end of World War II. So that slide should read 1865 to 1945, 1946. And then we have the Millennial Cycle from 1946 to 2023. So with the Great Power Cycle, it ends with the Great Depression and World War II. In the current millennial cycle that we're in, I think it ends with the 2008 financial crisis and the current polarization politically that we are in America, the rise of Donald Trump to his fall, to the rise of Joe Biden. We are still in a polarized America trying to find our identity. And so I think that is where we are at currently. So with those 4 seasons, we may also call them turnings. So the first turning is what's called an American high. And we can think of that as spring. The winter is over, it's warmed up. And what we saw last time the American high happened, which was 1946, it's the end of World War II is over. Everybody's exhausted from the Great Depression, World War II. Caucasians were able to benefit from the GI Bill and go out and build and live in suburbia. And so it becomes a very materialistic age where we're very focused on the outside world and how can I benefit and be comfortable. But during those 20 years of that spring season, inside we begin to die a little bit. And so we realize that spiritually, and that is meant as a very wide swath, spiritually we feel like something is wrong. And so we experience one of the first big events of a cycle, which is an awakening, a great awakening. So in America, we experienced the first Great Awakening with Jonathan Edwards, Charles Finney in the second Great Awakening, Billy Sunday in the third. In this time, we actually have 2 awakenings or 2 spiritual tracks kind of happening at the same time. On what we would call the evangelical side, we have Billy Graham, Oral Roberts, what we would call the Jesus movement. And on the other side, we would have New Age, transcendental, philosophical shifts with the feminist movement, and just a lot of different ideas that we embrace today. Then we end up with fall. And fall is something we would call the unraveling. And the unraveling is a time where we're pushing back against the success of the Great Awakening. So because of the success of that New Age philosophical Great Awakening, we have groups like Jerry Falwell Sr. who formed the moral majority to push back against those things. And we spent about 20 years in our American society pushing back, and it leads us eventually to the crisis. So the unraveling fuels us to reach the crisis, and we end up with a financial crisis as well as this current philosophical ethos crisis that we are in right now with our identity in America. Now, the reality is who grows up during a crisis? Gen Z. The Gen Z grows up in a crisis, and they're taking this all in. It has a profound effect on them, and we are not entirely sure the fullness of that profound effect that it will have on them. So real quick, let's look at idealist prophets, and idealist prophets are baby boomers. And so this is a generation that grows up as indulged children. They come of age as young crusaders. They cultivate principles as moralistic midlifers, and they emerge as wise leaders. We are in an age of where our baby boomer parents, my parents are baby boomers, but we see them as these wise leaders. Our cavalier nomads, this is our Gen X generation. And they grew up as unprotected children. This is where we get the term latchkey kid. They come of age as alienated young adults. Grunge movement, anybody? And then they mellow into pragmatic midlife leaders. And I think Gen X, again, they are the toughest of our generation, because now they're caring for their parents as well as their Gen Z children, and they're just caught in the middle with all of this. And so our hats are off to our Gen X cavalier nomads. Our civic heroes, that's me. I'm a millennial. We grew up as increasingly protected post-awakening children. I grew up that way. My parents felt like they needed to protect me from what they saw on TV as the violence in the 1960s and 70s, which eventually just faded away into the 1990s. And these parents would crusade for us millennials to have safer playgrounds to play on. The playgrounds are so safe now that nobody plays on them because they're just not interesting. And we will demonstrate hubris as energetic midlifers. I'm really looking forward to that hubris. Can't wait. Can't wait. And then we emerge as powerful elders attacked by the next awakening. So can't wait for the next great awakening to tell me how wrong I am with everything that I do. And then finally, Gen Z, that's what we're here to talk about, our adaptive artists. They grow up as overprotected children during a crisis. This is where we see a lot of safetyism with beginning in the 1990s with peanut allergies and snowplow parenting. So this is where we see like our children must be protected. And it's really a cue taken from millennials. Millennials grow up protected. Gen Z grows up super protected. What will happen with Gen Z when they get to midlife? Well, they will become indecisive midlifers, and they'll become rebellious or rogue to some degree and say, I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to live life to the fullest. But millennials like me and the next round of baby boomers, who I call the new frontier, we will tell them, no, Gen Z, you have a place and a role to play. As very protected people, get back in your place. Don't live your life to the fullest. We're in charge. And that's typically how it works with these cycles. And then they will age into empathic post-awakening elders. So, real quick, we talked about helicopter parenting and or snowplow parenting. And this is the example I like to give is Gen Z is like a generation that is a caterpillar in a chrysalis. They have, if you walk by a chrysalis while a caterpillar is trying to emerge, and if I took a pocket knife and made a slit and said, I just want to help the little guy get out. I don't want him to have to struggle so much. And I make that cut, that caterpillar will emerge and it won't fly away as a beautiful butterfly. It needs the tension and the pressure of escaping that chrysalis in order to emerge strong and ready to fly away. That's Gen Z. They have not emerged strong and ready to fly away in many ways. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump. I'm not running out of time. So I want to jump to slide number 20, the Journal of Child and Family Studies. And this particular study by Schifrin and Liss, questions that focused on the desired autonomy of the college students. So Gen Z is currently in college. Questions that focused on behaviors of helicopter parents. 42.6% exhibited mild to significant depressive symptoms. So if your parent was a helicopter parent, This was your likelihood of experiencing mild to depressive symptoms. Other results included a positive correlation between autonomy, competence, and relatedness to helicopter parenting. So what we take away from this is those with greater self-efficacy have a greater ability to self-regulate when life becomes overwhelming. And that's something that this Gen Z generation really struggles with. They don't have, they don't have the self-efficacy that they should. Low self-efficacy also correlates to a lack of goal orientation for gainful employment and an increase in depression. So a few years ago, was hanging out with a guy who used the same framework to analyze millennials as I do with Gen Z. And he came up with a question for millennials. He said the question is, what is beautiful? That's the question millennials ask. What is beautiful? And I come from that generation. I totally identify with it. What is the job that's beautiful, that's going to add meaning to the world? What's the next thing that I can do? What's the next cause I can take up? What is beautiful? If you can answer that for a millennial, you've got their attention. But for Gen Z, they ask the question, am I safe? Am I safe? And so what we see is because they have grown up overprotected, spent a lot of time with their parents, and have done most of their communication via computer applications, there is a need to be safe and to see themselves as safe. And I spoke with some professors who teach traditional undergraduate students, and they said, Aaron, that's like the language that my students dance around, is this question of feeling safe, secure in the classroom, things like that. And the question is, will this be good in the long run for Gen Z? So let's see. So I want to share an insight from Colorado Springs. So I live in Colorado Springs. I do some consulting here, and we are the land of 1,000 nonprofits. Specifically, we are the land of several hundred Christian, evangelical Christian nonprofits. And working with these nonprofits, I have developed an insight into some of their behaviors and how they want their employees to embody the ethos of their organizations. And so maybe you're familiar with this culture, but many of these organizations actually require their employees to come in on time, and they are allowed to spend the first 15 to 30 minutes in something that they call sometimes quiet time, Bible study, prayer, but they want their employees to take this time to mentally, spiritually prepare themselves for the day. And if that's the case, if that is beneficial to that organization to achieve this, I think that organizations who have Gen Z employees who are coming in with the highest levels of anxiety and depression than any previous generation, I think that a type of quiet time should be incorporated into the workspace. But I would use cognitive behavioral therapy techniques or therapies to substitute for the quiet time. So what is cognitive behavioral therapy? It's a type of psychotherapy in which negative patterns of thought about the self and the world are challenged in order to alter unwanted behavior patterns or treat mood disorders such as depression. And now let me say this. Am I a clinical psychologist? I am not. I've worked with a clinical psychologist on these ideas because I wanted to make sure that I was doing things right. Am I a therapist? I am not. The goal of using these techniques is not to turn you into a therapist. It is tools that everybody can use, and a therapist will say, yeah, these are great tools to use on your own. So if we look at the Mayo Clinic list of emotional challenges alleviated by CBT, you will see those. Great thing is, Jimmy Hart is going to send out a link to a Google Drive that I have for all of you if you want it. Has all of my notes, has this PowerPoint slide, has outlines to two important books, Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind and Gene Twinge's iGen, Gen Z. And you can take a bigger look. So if we look at CBT vocabulary, we would look at first the ABC model. And the ABC model is antecedents, behavior, consequences. So antecedents is what are thoughts leading up to the behavior? What are the negative thoughts that you're struggling with? Then you have the behavior. You act on those thoughts in some way. Maybe you become quite anxious or depressed. And then there's the consequences, the fallout of having that behavior. And we want to identify behaviors after a triggering event with CBT. So what were the habits that happened? What are the thoughts? What's the mood that these triggering events called? Again, with CBT vocabulary on the next slide, affective. This is what you feel. Affective is what you feel. Somatic. These are bodily sensations you have from a triggering event. And this can be something like trembling. Behavioral. Behavioral is the response. Cognitive. What thoughts are going through your mind in the triggering event? Relational. Which person makes this behavior worse or better? Who makes it worse or better? So now I'm going to do some scenarios, as I like to call them, with everybody. The first one I'm going to do on my own, and then I'm going to invite Mr. Jimmy Hart to come and join me for another one. But the first one that we want to do is a deep breathing technique. And so this allows anyone, and I encourage anyone to do this. I practice mindfulness on my own, and I find it very helpful for me to identify thoughts that are ruminating or just not good for me, so that I can identify them and address them. So what I want to do is I just want to invite everybody to, if you're sitting in your chair, which I'm assuming you are, we're at a virtual conference, so I assume you're sitting in your chair. And I want you to make sure that both feet are planted flatly on the ground. Both feet are planted flatly on the ground. Sit there. I want you to take your right hand and put it on your chest, center of your chest. I want you to take your left hand and I want you to put it right above your belly button. And then I want you to take a deep breath in and exhale. Now, for the next several breaths that we do, I want you to focus on the breathing happening in your stomach, not in your chest. So sometimes we breathe in our chest, which means we're keeping the air up here instead of down in our gut. So, those of you who work out or engaged in CrossFit, you'll be familiar with breathing with your gut instead of your chest. So let's just do this exercise for the next few seconds. So breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Now we're going to take a really deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Okay. Whatever you were feeling has probably subsided to some degree. So, I know you couldn't even sit down during my talk. You were so excited. You're like, woo, generations. You were throwing chairs in your office, things like that. But once you started the breathing technique, all of a sudden you were kind of in a different headspace. You're in a little bit of a different headspace. You felt calmer. I almost took a nap during my own presentation. It felt so good. So we want to use exercises like this to teach our Gen Z employees, like, hey, when you're feeling anxious over an email, stop, do this breathing exercise, and then let those feelings subside, and then tackle your email. So Jimmy, I'm ready for you to jump in if you're a willing candidate. And then I guess we'll do some Q&A after that.
I unmuted. All right. Start with the script, right?
Yes.
Right. So I'm playing the role of a conversation leader.
Yep.
When you spoke about Snapchat and
Let me tee it up just real quick. I'm so sorry. That's my fault. So this is an exercise, everyone, called hot thoughts. And these are things that we get triggered or that start ruminating in our heads. And what we want to do is we want people to notice that they're happening. We don't want them just caught in it. So if you're in a workspace, we want to teach our Gen Z employees to practice these, and to teach our managers and leadership to practice it with their Gen Z employees. So Jimmy is going to be the leader, the counselor, and I'm going to be Steve. So let's dive right in.
All right, Steve. When you spoke about Snapchat and Megan leaving you out, you said you felt like you'd always be alone. When you said that, your voice dropped while your head and eyes tilted toward the floor. What are you thinking right now?
You know, I just feel very hurt. And I'm afraid that I won't have friends, or that no one really wants to be my friend.
Let's consider that thought and the emotions that thought leads to. It seems that when the thought of loneliness and not having friends pops into your mind, your mood changes.
You know, now that I'm thinking about it, those thoughts do change how I go about my day. So these are things that we can do, that we can talk people through when they get stuck in different things. So, I mean, we could easily take this scenario and flip it just a little bit into the workspace a little bit more, and say, you know, when you spoke about Megan leaving you out of the project, you said you felt like you'd always be alone. When you said that, your voice dropped, your head and eyes tilted towards the floor. What are you thinking right now? Well, I feel very hurt, and I'm afraid that I won't have friends in the workplace, and that I'll get left out of future important projects. And then, you know, we can talk through that. So I'm going to wrap up with that, guys. And Jimmy, if there's any Q&A or whatever next steps are, I'm here for it.
All right, there are actually some incredible questions. Dr. Brown, your conversation really led to some good discussion in the chat. And I'm apologizing up front to all of our attendees that we're not going to be able to get to all of these. But a really good question around helping Gen Z feel safe in the workplace. Is that something that's primarily accomplished by paying them well enough to take care of themselves? Or is that a cultural element in the workplace itself? Is there something practically that we can do for them? And are there, you know, based on that parent match with boomers or Gen X, are there generational things we can take into account for who is best to help them?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So when I usually consult or talk about these things, top level leadership tends to reject what I have to say about this. And the reason top level leadership tends to reject it is because they're comprised mostly of baby boomers and Gen X or older Gen X. Now, I'm not saying that to be disparaging, but there is an attitude that comes with that generation of, well, why can't these kids buck up? Why can't they be strong? Why are they, you know, fill in the blank? Like, they just need to get it together. And my response is typically, well, you raised them. So what are you so upset about when you raised this generation and they didn't meet the expectations of being tough and resilient and all of these things? So if you raise them, then you need to fix some of this. And it's not fixing like, let's make Gen Z more like baby boomers or more like Gen X. We have to meet them where we are at. So my big thing is that organizations need to implement greater mental health strategies into their organization. They need to offer mental health, and they need to provide good insurance or programs for Gen Z to have access to these things. Now, with that said, I think the biggest thing, and anybody that's into leadership and read 1,000 books on leadership, you should know that in order to really be successful with an initiative in the organization, is your president, CEO, COO, C-suite leadership has to champion it. So in your organization, that needs to be championed, that we are going to train managers not to be therapists. That's not what we're proposing. We are training them to use these CBT tools in order to bring Gen Z into our workplace and make them the most productive possible and to help them build their self-efficacy. So there's a little bit of a shift of what is the role of the workplace. As a libertarian, I kind of think like Milton Friedman, the business of business is business. And so, I would naturally reject or push back against these ideas. But the reality is we're where we're at. And we have a generation that desperately needs our relational help in order to develop in their self-efficacy and want to be productive in our organizations.
All right, we're going to squeeze in one more question before we cut to our break. But this is one that is particularly germane to higher education. We've talked about the awareness of Gen Z brought on by the experiences they've witnessed from their parents and older family members. And part of that is a greater practicality, greater financial awareness. This is happening at a time when the cost of attending college is going up. So what should institutions like ours be aware of in how we communicate to this audience regarding the value proposition of higher ed?
That's going to look different for different organizations or different universities. I think this is where private universities have a leg up on our state institutions. So just take this with a grain of salt. I'm not knocking state institutions at all. I think classroom size is a huge one. It can be a huge selling point. Gen Z hasn't gotten the relational mentoring that they want. And so because they haven't got it, they're looking for mentorship and guidance and leadership. And that used to be a big role of a faculty member. And clearly I have a certain ideology, especially as a professor, of what the role of an educator should be. But I think universities need to push a mentorship component, but back it up, a guidance component, but back it up. Having programs on campuses that help guide Gen Z students into the next steps of their maturation. I think those would be huge selling points for Gen Z.
All right. Well, thank you very much to my good friend, Dr. Aaron Brown from North Central University in Colorado Springs. You probably noticed I switched my background to what is actually the view out of Aaron's kitchen window, or a reasonable facsimile, to be true. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who participated in the YouTube chat. A great conversation there and some great connections being made. We did have a quick break built into our schedule at this time. So we'll be going back to our SECCA cut screen here in just a moment. And we will be back at 10:15 Central Time with Dr. G. Christine Taylor from the University of Alabama and Dr. Derek Roveris from Louisiana State University to talk about some diversity and inclusion elements that will be useful to all of us. So again, thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you to everyone in our audience, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes.